Hello Cambridge and Cantabrigians, Liz Collins here with your Facecast and summary of some of our headlines here at neighbormedia.org. This month on Not for Nothing, Susan Fleischman has many powerful and poignant pieces. Her most recent was a discussion with Executive Director Moshe Rohani and immigration attorney Deirdre Giblin from Community and Legal Services and Counseling Center. They cover the legal and counseling services offered to immigrants, refugees, and low-income populations in Cambridge. On September 25th, Not for Nothing took a look at the voting system in Cambridge and taught us where to look for information about candidates. Finally, Susan Fleischman's Not for Nothing took on a timely discussion of white supremacy and racism, police brutality, and the acquittal in St. Louis of the police officer who killed Anthony Lamar Smith. In another segment, Siobhan Bredren covers the Cambridge Beat the Belt mural rededication, illuminating the event's goal to celebrate citizen activism in Cambridge. And finally, in response to the hurricane disaster in Puerto Rico, Maurice Wilkie covered the local Latin Caribbean fusion restaurant La Fabrica Central's Puerto Rico real-time recovery fundraiser on the afternoon of September 24th. That's all for this Facecast. I'm Liz Collins, and thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to check out these full stories and more at neighbormedia.org.
This evening we are training the two kinds of election workers that we have for all of our elections. The two people that run the precinct, the warden and the clerk is called the clerk because the clerk records information, what clerks have done classically throughout the ages. Warden, I think, goes back to England, probably, and the name of the officer who runs the precinct. In reality, many of the tasks for the warden and clerk overlap. But in the case of the inspector, they have only three jobs. The first job is to check names off. The second job is to provide any assistance. And the third job is to be by the ballot box to make sure that people feed their ballots in properly. I mean, it sounds boring, but in fact, they have to know the law and they have to know what to do when something out of the ordinary happens.
Take it to your polling place. Okay? So here's your first report. Everybody needs to sign signs.
The people who work in the precincts are paid by the city, and for that day at least they're city employees. They also take an oath of office. We recruit them by having regular recruitment sessions, usually in August. And people work for a good long time. It's persistent. I mean, I've been doing this now for 11 years, and I have workers that have worked in every single election in those 11 years, and that's been a lot of elections.
That's the tactic.
If I could choose one thing to tell voters, it is that we really are there to serve you and make it easier for you to vote. We're not there to trample your rights. We're not there to make life difficult for you. We want you to vote. We want you to get out and vote. If you have any question that it's important to do so, I remind you that every election proves how important it is that you get out to vote. And that's our interest in doing this job.
to Happiness in the City. This is a very important conversation we'll have today. and that is about the very powerful meaning of the concept of dance in the context of authority. Dance is a very ancient phenomena. We know about King David, who danced in front of God, and God enjoyed it. So we have one of the most powerful testimonies about a person with high authority dancing before the highest authority, who is God Himself. We have many examples of how beautiful motion of dance was appreciated as a sign of joy, and joy is connected with something that is desirable. Joy of the Lord is our strength, as those who are Christians and Jews believe. So we have a situation in which we have to understand security from the point of view of what makes our motion joyful and happy. And dance is one of the expressions of joyful, beautiful motion, and that is a very powerful way in which we learn security in motion. We have a lot of discussions now how to restore sense of security and safety in many countries, and I think that before we understand how to do it, we have to look at examples of what is joyful movement, or what is movement and motion that comes from ability to move. When you read about dance, you see how many books are there, how many points of view, but I use, for brevity's purpose, Wikipedia, and here is the article that I recommend you read. And Wikipedia defines dance as a performing art form consisting of purposefully selected sequences of human movement. This movement has aesthetic and symbolic value and is acknowledged as dance by performers and observers within a particular culture. And dance can be categorized and described by its choreography, by its repertoire of movements, or by its historical period or place of origin. So you see here an example of dance, male and female dancers, and what I wanted you to look further, you will see how beautifully Wikipedia writes about diverse aspects of dance. So we have to have more sophisticated understanding of beautiful organized motion that dance is. A lot of people today move a little bit and they think it's dance, but it's just disorganized motion. And dance by definition should be organized. It has to have certain shapes, certain rhythms, sequences, timing, In fact, in order to be a good dancer, you have to take lessons. Also, there are two ways in which we can look at dance. One is when we look at it as performance in the context of a theatrical avenues and venues, or participatory. And sometimes they are connected, but Wikipedia further distinguishes between social dances, ceremonial dances, competitive, erotic, martial, or sacred liturgical. We have many other activities connected with human movement that often have dance-like qualities, like martial arts, gymnastics, cheerleading, figure skating, synchronized swimming, marching bands, and many other forms of athletics. So we see in this wonderful article in Wikipedia how complex motion of dance is. And I think that the main reason I stress the culture of dance is because it has many social values that allow people to understand themselves as living beings in motion. Sometimes when I walk down the street, there's a whole bunch of people competing for space, but it's a big street, there's plenty of space, but there's often little awareness about spatial presence of another human being in the context of a street. The same in the context of an office or school or countries. And I think that dance teaches that understanding of our physicality that takes space and that has capacity of motion as its nature, and that motion should be cultivated and made beautiful in diverse ways in which we move. There were times in my life I couldn't move because I was in a very difficult situation after a car accident. And in this particular 1 year where I couldn't move virtually at all, except the upper part of my body, but I was in this one place. And I thought a lot about the meaning and power of motion and dance, and many ways in which we take movement for granted until something happens, and you realize what can happen when a person is restricted in motion, cannot move. And of course I'm this great news story because of many wonderful things that happened. I regained the ability to move, and eventually it really was because of martial arts. So for years I couldn't reconnect with my upbringing in ballet, national dances, folk dances, and many other forms of dances in which I was brought up in a family that understands the value of beautifully dancing and having connection and knowledge about current dances, but also about heritage, which comes from the knowledge of dance. So when the opportunity came for me to understand that martial arts has knowledge about human body and motion that I didn't have from other sources, that slowly but very powerfully started teaching my life, my body, how to move beautifully through martial arts motions and movements. And that led me eventually to MIT because I was strong enough with help to take courses, and then I persuaded people about the power of touch, kinetic way of connecting to objects. And today we have great smartphones and computers that respond to touch. But when I started studying martial arts years ago, and I was told that the primary way to understand our motion and informatics of what is happening in the body, that this was through touch, I was not really trusting this. But very quickly I realized it was true, and that the sense of touch is connected to vast knowledge about motion and movement of our lives within our bodies. So now I am regaining ability to dance as I was brought up. And I wanted you to learn that expression of dance that comes from years in which this ability was limited or injured, that expression of dance within a life of a person is always proof of joy and love of life and appreciation of our being here on earth, and appreciation of the fullness of abilities within our bodies. People who have restrictions in motion always have some sadness within them. So I encourage you to connect dance to all kinds of aspects in which we express authority. Today there is a lot of demand on rulemaking that comes from anger and vengeance. Dance is opposite to it. It creates a way in which people can find freedom within themselves first and then share it with other people. In other words, when a movement is restricted within a person or within a group of people or within a country, it's very difficult to express natural joy of affection of life, because something limits and something restrains and something prevents others and protects from this joy being expressed. So restriction in motion is a form of restricted security, whereas beautiful motion like dance is security of motion that comes from the right place, from the place of liberty of motion. And liberty of motion always is a standard of liberty, because by definition it creates joy of life. Ancients describe our souls as those aspects of our lives that are in motion. So the very nature of our souls, and that's where we have will and that's where we have emotions, that our soul needs that motion to function in a healthy way. Soul that cannot move is very unhappy, very restricted. So I encourage you to add the understanding of dance to the ways in which you view authority. It's not all about rights. it is also about healthy life and ability to express joy through life. And this is something that comes from within a person. This cannot be a place in which we can write demanding letters to make sure that we dance. This is something that comes from within a person's life and can be cultivated, can be shared with others, but this is this one part of us that comes from gentle connection to the very nature of life. And I think that dance teaches us that there are many things that have to start within us first before we can share it with other people. When we understand that what is within us is God's playground, and this relationship between what is within us and God who created us is the foundation of all relationships. When people start putting demands on other people to fix what is within them, they lose a sense of liberty and control. So when we understand that dance is something that has to come from within us, and if it's lacking, we have to keep expecting that it will come back. We can do some other ways of motion, but we should always try to keep motion from within. We have to have that trust that sooner or later it may come. That hope is very important. And as long as we breathe, it may happen. It may bring in healing within us, within internal parts of us, and then we'll have much better relationship with other people. I think that what I just said refers not only to an individual's ability to dance, but also to nations and even to the world. Somehow we lost that connection of joy to authority, and authority became authority in the context of motionless demand that expects certain rules and regulations, but they come at the expense of liberty. Whereas when authority is connected to the joy and the right order of motion, it understands the relationship between security and motion. Because if governments and authority connected to governments start creating security that paralyzes everything, then it creates sadness and restraint that is almost like a grave. Nobody wants that. I don't want that. When we understand that the relationship between security, authority, and motion has to be organized in a way that creates liberty of motion and a sense of security and safety coming from the right authority, then we have peace and the right order. So law and order is not a concept that should just come from assumption that it is always good, because there can be good law and order and there can be disorganized law and order that poses as law and order but actually creates paralysis. Good law and order never suppresses joy of life. Good law and order has to be built around joy and liberty of life. That's one big lesson I learned from my grandmother. And my grandmother, Janina, she had a gift that anything she touched and anything that she looked at came to life and was thriving. And I understand what it means to have that relationship between authority and fertility of fullness of life. So I think that we have to rethink the way we do authority today, and we have to look at how it affects the joy of life. When you understand that joyful life, happy dance, has no place for sadness or for disorder, because by very definition it's organized and joyful, then you understand that there is a standard of what it is to have joy in beautiful movement. We have a great king, Louis XIV, who actually invented ballet, and as a king danced for years and years, for decades, creating a great culture of dance in France that is still alive. So, in closing, I encourage you to restore liberty of motion and dance in the context of authority and security. Thank you so much, and see you here next week for another edition of Happiness in the City.